I'm bored. I'm going crazy around here. I need to go out. I wonder what Sam is up to. I should hit them up. Oof, on second thought, maybe not. I never messaged them back. I was waiting until I had the spoons, and then I just kind of forgot to do it, and now it's like 3 weeks late, and I don't know what to say now. It's kind of awkward. I need to stop doing that. Maybe Vicky? No, she's been busy lately. I don't want to bother her. Ugh, I need to meet more people. But I mean, it's hard enough keeping the ones I have. Am I a bad friend? Do I even know how to be a good one? Do I know how to have friends? Shit.
Before we go any further,
What are we thinking? Are we liking the new color scheme? I kind of think it puts the bi in bisexual lighting, but I don't know. I like pink and I like blue. Sue me. And it is hot in here right now. I think the climate controls are busted. I hear that y'all are having that problem down on the surface too. Do you have a friend that you don't talk to, that you don't see regularly? Maybe it's a friend you've met online. Maybe someone you've never even met in person. You first meet and you connect, and then, I don't know, you start to kind of drift away. Or maybe you have a coworker that you really enjoy working with, and you work for the place for maybe, 2 years, 3 years, and, you find a new job finally, you move on, and you tell them, oh yeah, we'll keep in touch. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, definitely, don't be a stranger. And then you hardly talk to them ever again. Maybe there's people that you were thick as thieves with, just dummy thick. And then as you got older, you just kind of drifted apart. And now you don't talk anymore. Maybe you haven't talked in years. I know for me, there's some people I haven't talked to in over a decade. In some cases, that's a good thing. But in other cases, I don't know. I miss some of these people. I want to see what they're up to. But how do you rekindle a friendship like that, especially if you don't live anywhere nearby? Honestly, the friends that I do have are saints for sticking with me. I'm flaky, and I sometimes go days or weeks or even months without responding. Sometimes I forget about people entirely, and then they'll hit me up and they'll be like, hey, what's going on? And I'll be like, hey, what's going on? Oh, right. What is going on? It's usually not much. Some of you may have figured this out by now, but I am ADHD and autistic, and I've not been formally diagnosed as either. I don't really care about diagnosis other than its ability to get me access to things that maybe I wouldn't have access to if I was undiagnosed, like medication for ADHD. It doesn't work for everybody, but something that I kind of want to give a try. Just know going into the video that that's the framework that I'm going to be operating under, and the assumption that I'm going to be operating under. A little while ago, I posted a poll on Threads. I was asking my followers and really anyone who saw it, if you're neurodivergent, how does being neurodivergent affect your friendships? Do you find it hard to make friends? Hard to keep friends? Hard to do both? Like me? Or no problems at all? And I had a lot of people share their stories, and honestly, it was really insightful stuff. You start to see some common threads. Things like feeling like an imposition on people. Feeling like your specific needs or your specific being is annoying to be around or is hard to handle. Struggling with issues like mood regulation. Struggling with time allocation, finding time in your busy schedule to meet with people. Sometimes straight up just forgetting that people even exist. Not in that sense, but like you don't think about people if they're not in your immediate vicinity. I think that's an ADHD thing. I've heard this from a few people. Bad memory, distractibility. Not being able to keep up with people long distance. This goes back to the lack of object permanence thing. And I think most important of all, finding it hard to make a real connection with people, just really getting them and them getting you, understanding them, and building that trust. It can be really hard. And so this is something I have been thinking about a lot lately, and I really wanted to dig into why it may be so hard for neurodivergent people to have friends. This is something that I struggle with. I'm speaking from firsthand knowledge in this video. I'm also speaking from secondhand knowledge, the stories that I've heard from other people, the experiences that they've shared. And I'm also going to be synthesizing all of that with available research. And from what I've seen, the research, it looks kind of bleak. Making and keeping friends in general is hard. I would say maybe harder than it's been in a long time. Between COVID, social media keeping us at arm's length, but also wanting us to be constantly engaged, stuff like work and responsibilities, just capitalism, the death of third spaces. How many places are there for you to hang out with your friends that aren't just your house, their house, somebody's house, that also are like in public where you can meet? Places that don't force you to buy something. I promise I won't get too much into urbanism in this video, but it's a factor. I think COVID was the kicker for a lot of people, and loneliness is on the rise. This is objectively true. There's a lot of these factors involved. Some of the people that are hit hardest by loneliness are people on the margins. And one of those groups of people that does intersect with a lot of other groups of people is neurodivergent people, and that's what I want to focus on today. Now, I have my own hypotheses about this. It is not really that scientific. It is simply just observations that I've made. I think with autistic people, it tends to be harder to make friends in the first place. We tend to have more social deficits, or at least what are perceived as social deficits, because how we talk about autism and autistic traits is very much framed through the lens of what is normal, right? So autistic people may have more trouble making friends, whereas ADHD people may have more trouble keeping friends. ADHD people may be more outgoing, may have less of those social deficits, but may struggle with time allocation and again, the object permanence, just remembering to reach out to people. A lot of times people might get the idea that you're not interested. And honestly, nothing could be further from the truth. But it doesn't go over well with people. And some people tend to not be very forgiving or very patient. Which is really sad because neurodivergent people tend to be some of the most loyal and most insightful and most entertaining and helpful friends that you will have. Just a joy to be around. But it does require that you understand people are going to have some quirks. One of the D's in ADHD stands for deficit. I don't like that language, but it's the language that most people use, so that's what I'm going to be using. If you are both ADHD and autistic, like I am, then you probably have trouble doing both, making and keeping friends. I know that it's definitely a struggle for me, and I'll get into that later. So a lot of people share their personal experiences, and I have my own personal experiences, but I also really wanted to dig deep into the research here, see what that says. So I'm going to be synthesizing a lot of the commonalities, especially between the research and the anecdotes that I've heard from people. There's a stereotype about autistic people that we prefer to be alone, and this it goes way, way back, and it was essentially an observation that autistic people tend to struggle in environments with a lot of people, and it was just assumed, and they didn't struggle when they were alone, and it was just assumed that it was because they preferred to be alone, that they liked to be alone. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. That may be true for some autistic people. I know that I need to be alone sometimes, but not all the time. And I don't necessarily prefer to be alone. Sometimes I do to recharge. Yeah, someone needing it sometimes doesn't mean that they prefer that. I'm focusing mostly on autism and ADHD here because those are the ones that I'm most familiar with and the people that I talk to are most familiar with. That is primarily what I studied in the research. Those are not the only forms of neurodivergence. There's an infinite amount of variability. One thing that came up in the research was communication styles. Neurodivergent people tend to communicate in a very different way than what neurotypical people are expecting. And neurotypical people may find it jarring or off-putting or confusing, even hard to read, which is funny because, like for instance, with autistic people, when we are not masking, we are being honest. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't have a reason to lie to you. It literally takes more energy for me to lie to you. I'd rather just say exactly what I think at all times. That would make my life so much easier. I think everyone could do with a little bit more of that. Obviously, we need to be respectful of people's feelings and understand that maybe they won't take it in a, helpful way. But sensory issues are a big factor for a lot of neurodivergent people. A lot of us have trouble with loud sounds or getting overwhelmed. We may have different sensitivities to environmental factors, texture, temperature, the sun, water. These are all things that may limit where some neurotypical people may want to go. Less places to go, less places to hang out, less places to meet people. Especially if we're talking about socializing, right? Meeting people requires socializing. Is it any wonder that so many of us turn to the internet as the primary tool for socialization? Now, this is true in general, especially of younger folks. And as I talked about before, this is just really a byproduct of how we have organized our society. And in a lot of ways, we didn't really have much say in it. Yeah, I mean, I've met most of my friends and partners online. It's hard for me to connect with people. Another thing that came up in the research a lot was social ostracization. People being rejected or maybe even mocked or talked about behind their back, just treated differently. A lot of neurodivergent people tend to really struggle with depression and anxiety, and if you are afraid of being perceived as strange, afraid of not being seen, of not being understood, that's just a vicious cycle right there. That's not a good recipe. As I said before, some people might be afraid of being perceived as obnoxious because, maybe they don't have a volume control. Maybe they jump from one topic to another too fast. Maybe they struggle to keep up when other people jump from topics too fast. Maybe they feel too much to handle. Or maybe they just feel not interesting at all because they have trouble opening up in these social settings. When they do go to these social events or in these public spaces to meet people, a lot of us, have trouble opening up. And we need to feel really comfortable with someone before we can even do that and drop the mask. Masking is incredibly labor intensive. I have to do it every day for work. It sucks. Pretty much every job that I've had has required me to do some level of masking. And I'm one of the lucky ones who's mostly been employed for the past 15 years. A lot of us just have specific needs, and we could just do with some understanding and some patience. But it's hard to accommodate us, apparently. A lot of people don't know how, or they don't want to take the time to just think about, hey, what do they need? What does my friend need? Maybe they need a break. Maybe they need the volume down a little bit. Maybe we need to start meeting in a different place at a different time. Maybe with less people. Maybe we need to do something different while we are meeting. Just the fact that somebody isn't looking you in the eye all the time does not mean they're not paying attention. Quite frankly, I pay attention to people better when I'm not looking them directly in the eye. It's easier for me. I'm not having to like force eye contact and think about, oh my God, am I doing it right? Am I doing the thing? This is what people expect. I gotta look. I gotta look them in the eyes. Okay, now I gotta look away. Now I gotta look them in the eyes again. That's what's expected. You can't look them in the eyes too long or they might think that you're staring. Okay, then I gotta look away. Oh yeah, no, totally. I get that. Oh wait, it's been too long. Okay, look them in the eyes again. This is literally shit that I have to think about. And a lot of people have to think about this on a conscious level. And if you're one of those people like me that sometimes takes a really long time between messages to get back to people, God help you, because a lot of people are not very forgiving of that. And the depression and the anxiety that comes with the social ostracization, right? That can create a negative feedback loop. You get depressed, you get anxious, so you go out less. You go hang out with your friends less. You talk to them less. You're afraid that they don't like you, so you talk to them even less. And so on and so forth. And it's hard to break out of that cycle. I know. It's really difficult. And it can lead you to become very withdrawn. People might wonder what happened to you. People might wonder, did they do something wrong? You might wonder, did you do something wrong? It's so messy. A lot of people with ADHD also struggle with impulsive behavior. This can lead to addictive behaviors and novelty seeking. Always looking for something new, something exciting. Personally, I have to balance the novelty seeking because I really do crave novelty. I want new things, but I also have to balance that with my ability and desire to actually like do things. Getting out of the house, meeting people. Sometimes I have the energy, sometimes I really just don't. So the research is very sparse to begin with. A lot of times studies only look at a small group of people. White people are often overrepresented in these studies, as are men. Some studies define men as people assigned male at birth. Honestly, most of them do, so that's not great. So there's definite biases in the research, and there's compounding factors among neurodivergent people. Things like race, things like gender, things like socioeconomic background, things like ability. These can all play into neurodivergent people's affinity for making and keeping friends. But reading the research on this topic has honestly given me a lot of clarity, and I'm glad to have done it. It's helped me understand myself and other people a lot better. And the thing about it is, when you don't have a lot of friends, when you don't have a lot of connections, not only can that lead to more anxiety and more depression, more loneliness, feeling isolated, feeling cut off. There are also like objective social and economic disadvantages that come with not having a lot of friends. Lack of connections. How many people get their jobs or find housing? Like, they find someone who's renting a room or renting a house. How many people get that through connections? You know less people, you have less connections. You're at a disadvantage. Autistic people already have higher rates of unemployment than allistic people. Allistic meaning not autistic. So you can imagine how that plays out for a lot of people. There's also a lack of a support system, right? Not just emotional support, but also material support. Hey, I need help with food. I need help with money. I need a ride. I need help moving, stuff like that. You don't have a lot of friends. You don't have a big support system. These are all things that objectively make life harder for neurodivergent people than neurotypical people. And I think a lot of people just don't know about that and don't think about it that way. Not having a lot of friends, not having a lot of connections can lead you to feel incredibly isolated, incredibly lonely. and that's not a fun feeling. One of the reasons that my channel is called what it is, one of the reasons that I called myself the cosmonaut, is because sometimes I do feel like I'm drifting, listless, just floating through space, alone. That is my experience on a almost daily level. Being in a crowd of people and still feeling alone, still feeling like you don't belong. Speaking of support systems, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I make new ones. And support me on Patreon, because I want to make more of these videos. I'm enjoying this, and I want to make them bigger and better. God, imagine me on ADHD meds actually being able to keep my train of thought on one track and not have to jump from track to track. I might have to do a different format. We'll see. Have you ever met a homeschool kid? You know them when you see them, right? You can just kind of clock them from a mile away. They just have a quality to them. I was one of those homeschool kids. My parents pulled me out of public school after the first grade and homeschooled me for the rest of my childhood and my teenage years until I finished high school. So as a result, I was at home most of the time. Really, the only company I had a lot of times was my family. I didn't have a lot of friends. During that time in public school, I did make one good friend, and I don't remember much about him. I just know that we, hung out a lot and seemed to get along pretty well. I also made enemies. There was the school bully who I used to get into fights with because I didn't like the fact that he was picking on other students, and I would give him a hard time for it, and we would throw hands occasionally. It was a good time. This was kindergarten. So yeah, being homeschooled, after that, mostly I hung out with my family. I did have some friends from one of the local homeschool groups. I hesitate to call them a co-op. They were an organization, a loose affiliation of mostly families. Things were done at the family level, which is very old school. But they would organize like sports, and we would play with other teams from other schools, like private schools around the area that I lived in. So I had friends from basketball, and I had friends from theater because I was in drama. That was actually kind of hard and kind of anxiety inducing being up on stage, but it was good getting to know a lot of those kids. It was a good experience. I mostly enjoyed the backstage part, the stagehand production side of things. That was where I really shone, but acting was pretty fun too. I met people through there, and church was a big one too. My parents took me and my siblings to a couple different churches. There were, I would say, two big ones that I remember. And I knew a lot of friends from church. These are people that are mostly still Christians. I am not any longer. But, I would go to summer camps. I would meet kids there. I remember this Christmas party that I went to one time. It was so awkward. Parties have always been so awkward. As a kid, I did not know what to do at parties. These days, I still don't. I just kind of wing it. I usually end up in the kitchen or, hanging out with the dog in the corner. And I think a lot of people end up making friends that way through school and through church and other places like that. If you're not religious, maybe just neighbors. I didn't really have neighbors that I could make friends with. I lived in the middle of nowhere. There weren't a lot of houses around, so I didn't really have neighbors. For a lot of people, those relationships don't last until adulthood. In my case, none of them have, but there were very few to begin with. I can maybe count on two hands the number of close friends that I've had over my lifetime. Once I was older and I started working, starting around the age of 16 is when I really started working full time. I would meet people through work. Mostly I had work friendships, and they're great when you're at work, but once you leave, it's kind of hard to keep up with people. You find out, maybe you don't have a ton in common, whereas before you had work to bond over. Now, you just don't talk to people anymore. There's several people that I haven't talked to in years that I used to love working with, and I did consider friends at the time. Those relationships don't usually last after I leave jobs, or after they leave jobs. Now, all of this was before I came out as trans, and after coming out, I mostly have met people online. I've made a lot of friends online, as I said earlier. And honestly, one of my best friends is my ex. So, former partners, One thing that I do find interesting and is pertinent to my story, being that I'm trans, I am a trans woman. I'm also non-binary. It's kind of complicated. But I don't have a lot of women in my life, especially a lot of cis women. I didn't grow up knowing a lot of cis women, just my family members, really. I didn't get to hang out with a lot of the goyles, because in, these homeschool groups that we were a part of, they were very gender segregated. Very gender segregated. So I never really got to get to know girls or women. And it wasn't until recently I started working with more women. So there hasn't been a lot of women in my life. And that's a weird spot to be in if you're a trans femme. There's some stuff you got to learn. And it's easier to learn it from somebody who knows, and not have to figure it out on your own. Another thing I've noticed is I tend to get attached a lot more these days. I think that's due to just being more in touch with myself and my feelings. I get attached to people, and it hurts when I lose them. I've lost friends before, and it sucks. It really sucks. I fear that making friends now. I fear drifting away or having to cut ties. I cut ties with them. They cut ties with me for whatever reason. It doesn't really get any easier. And in some ways, it's made me a more jaded, more bitter person. Looking at myself, my particular difficulty with making and keeping friends, there's a lot of common threads with the stories that I've heard from other people. I have a really bad memory. I just sometimes will not think about people for a long period of time. And I will be thinking about them if I'm talking to them. And I will miss people. But if I'm not actively thinking about people, if they're not actively in my periphery or in my life on a regular basis, it's hard to just remember to reach out. I think that's what it comes down to, is just remembering to reach out. People want you to just say hello. Sometimes it's hard to remember to just do that. It can take a lot out of you. Yeah, getting bogged down and distracted by everything that's going on in life, that's a huge barrier to keeping friends. If you're burnt out or your social battery is run out, you don't really have a lot of time and energy for making new friends. Especially, it's hard enough just keeping them. For me, I have a lot of social anxiety, and it's hard for me to open up in large groups of people. I do much better in small groups of people. Think 2 to 4. I really enjoy getting to know people one-on-one. That's honestly like one of the best ways that I get to know people is one-on-one. But, a lot of people want to invite you to parties, or they want to invite you out to get drinks, or to the club, or to a picnic, or to, a show, or this, that, and the other. A lot of places that are going to be really crowded or really loud. And honestly, finding a real connection as a neurodivergent person is difficult. I don't find it easy to connect with people on many levels, mentally, physically, emotionally, sexually. It's hard. It's hard to connect with people. Hard to have that real connection and feel like somebody gets you and you get them. There's a lot of trust involved there. And sometimes it takes time for us to build that trust. But once you have it, one thing that the research is bad at examining and quantifying is, what does loneliness feel like? You can hear people's words, but you also have to look for commonalities. So there's a lot of nuance that gets lost in that process. So here's me telling you what loneliness feels like to me. It's a strong feeling of not belonging. Feeling like I'm not going to find my people. Sometimes not even knowing who my people are. Hoping that they might be out there, but knowing that it might be really hard for me to meet them. Maybe I might never meet them. But I have hope, though. Being connection starved, being emotion starved, touch starved, sex starved, while also being burnt out on, or like overstimulated, or burnt out from work, or overwhelmed in general, just exhausted from life. That's kind of what it feels like to me. I oftentimes find myself dwelling on people who have mistreated me, or people who I've mistreated, or people who have abused me or manipulated me, or just straight up left. Again, when you make these strong connections, you get attached to people. It hurts losing someone like that, especially if they do you wrong and then they just leave. It can be bewildering. It can leave you questioning yourself. It can leave you wondering what you did wrong. Are you a bad person? Am I a bad person? Was there something I said? Could I have done something better? What does it all mean? And sometimes there's not a good reason. Sometimes people just dip. Sometimes people just aren't good friends. Sometimes people got their own stuff that they are working through. And it was just a bad time and they took it out on you. It's not okay. But sometimes that is how it be. So being an anxious person, loneliness can feed into my self-image issues, which then feed into loneliness when I push people away or I don't want to try to meet new people. And it's just a negative feedback loop. And it's really hard to break out of that. This video was kind of heavy, and I promise the next one will be less so. I try to usually end videos on some kind of call to action, however small it may be. What do you do about all of this? I don't know yet. I think I'm figuring it out, but I've learned a few things. If you're neurodivergent, or if you suspect you are, then you probably are. Be patient with yourself. You're a human. You're going to make mistakes. And sometimes you're not making any mistakes at all. Sometimes you're just being you. You have a brain that works differently than other people's brains. Keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's society that isn't ready to accept you and hasn't made room for you. You deserve for society and for the people around you to make room for you, to accommodate you. So be patient with yourself. Don't beat yourself up about things. If you're not neurodivergent, just be kind, be nice, be patient. Just bear with us. Because I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's not easy being friends with neurodivergent people. I say this as someone with a majority of my friends are neurodivergent. It can be tricky sometimes. There's just more stuff to remember. Sure. But a lot of it comes down to common courtesy. A lot of it comes down to consent. A lot of it comes down to thinking about things in a way that you wouldn't normally think about them. Thinking about these things like sensitivities or social, aversions or, ways to keep up with people, ways to keep their attention. I promise you that neurodivergent people will be some of the best friends that you will ever have. Some of us do require a little bit more patience, but we're worth it. If you have neurodivergent friends, if you know neurodivergent people in your life, be patient and be kind. And I promise you, we will stick around. Well, that's really all that I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you're still here, it really means a lot to me. And I will see you next time. Bye.